Hello, welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to make a 17th century bed, a bed which is actually placed in a pub. So in that time it was pretty common to have a bed just in the room of the bar downstairs. So typical bed has a kind of vertical and horizontal curtain. Of course, you have more rich ornamental shaped beds, but we are going to make a very simple one for the more poor people. So this is a very good example here. Of course, the vertical curtain is the one that can slide open. And then we're also going to make the pillow and the sheet. So we're going to take this image, this painting, and put them on my left screen, and now we can start modeling. So we always start with primitives, a box. In this case I'm going to play it a bit fast forward because in the previous tutorials you already saw how to model, so otherwise this tutorial would become too long and I would just show you the same things. Once the bed is modeled, it looks like this. So very simple, actually everything is made out of boxes which are just scaled. Now it's time for UV mapping. We can choose, or we can with Ctrl G join all of our selection of planks and then start UV mapping, but then you have to UV map and place every single polygon of them correctly. Like I show you here, it's not such a good option because it's a lot more work. So like you see here, if I put an UV unwrap on this, this is the result. So you really need to go through every single polygon and place them correctly. So what I did now is I just undo, and I will just UV map first one plank, and all the rest are instances here. So the planks which are long, I made them instances so that I only need to UV map one of them. All the other ones go automatically. And then after I'm happy with this UV plank layout, I will join them all together, and then I can drag them next to each other and give them a separate texture later on. So I'm just going through all of the planks. Some of them I still UV map individually because they are different than all the rest. For example, this front plank here. Now with individual scaling mode on, you can scale all your selection on its local axis, so that here we scale all the planks a little bit in the width, so that there's a small gap between them, and it makes it look a little bit more realistic than if I would just leave them next to each other. You don't have any holes and then it looks a bit too clean. So giving them a little bit of space makes it more believable. These ones I already attached, you see. So once that is UV mapped, we go to look for a texture. Something a little bit dirty, used. But you can also brush that in Photoshop, so you don't always need to look for the perfect texture, because you can make a lot yourself in Photoshop too, by adding multiple layers on top of each other. So this one looks good. I'm going to download the high resolution one. Open this at Photoshop, create our maps, diffuse, put that in there. Going to just reduce the resolution a bit because 3000 is too high. We're going to save this as our diffuse texture to load up in Blender. just going to rotate it and resave it. Here we can try to add a bit more contrast via the curve adjustment layer. See if we get any result out of that we like. A bit too gray. Okay, let's see what this gives us in Blender. Let's overwrite. And this is the result. What I did here, you didn't see it, but I selected all the planks and pressed Ctrl J to join them to convert them to one mesh. So let's just place the first one somewhere, and once that's good, we do the same for all the other planks, because like you saw, they were instances, so they still shared the same location on the UV map. So it's just a lot of manual work, but the result will be good. I find that this texture has too many dark spots, so we're going to look for another texture like this one that I've re-downloaded and imported, as it's a bit more even in terms of brown color, so this is a bit better. Also for the front part, I just first select all of the UVs of these planks, and once we're happy with that, we just select one plank and again do the same, position in somewhere on the UV map. In this case, for this model, UVs can overlap. It's no problem because we are not going to bake from a high poly model, we're just using this texture later on as a normal map. So in this case it doesn't matter. If it looks good, then that is fine. I think it's finished now. All the planks have their wood texture. Okay, now it's time to make a bump map. Let's duplicate our diffuse folder. First we remove the color, and then we can save our texture as a bump map. Okay, now we load it into Blender and enable normal map. We have to enable GLSL shading to see it in our viewport, the bump mapping. Change a bit the lighting so that we have better feedback in our viewport. While I'm doing this, I actually already attached all the planks to each other with Ctrl G, so that now it's actually one mesh, like you see here. And now we can apply also the scaling so that the bump mapping shows correctly, because you know if the scaling is not 111, the units are reacting wrong on this. So I reduced it to 0.05 to have a realistic bump mapping of wood. Okay, let's duplicate the bump mapping now to create a specularity map. Let's just, for the moment, don't change anything and just save it as specularity, and then we'll see what the result is in Blender. So let's just create a new texture, import the specular, put our viewport to rendered mode, which you can see even better the result. Of course, you put it on specular intensity and color. It's a bit too glossy, I think. So let's just change the hue saturation and make it a little bit darker so that there's less specularity, less white reflecting. Just refresh this, I think this is already better. It should not be too shiny. Okay, so let's maybe just change the color, make it a little bit more brown. Resave this, the diffuse. Okay, yeah, I think that is better. Let's just save this Blender file and let's continue working on it. Now let's create the curtains. First the one on top, the horizontal one, so we just start with a plane, scale it more or less to the correct dimensions, place it where it should be. Okay, that's fine. And now we have to subdivide our mesh because you know, when the physics calculate it transforms every vertex, every point, so the more points you have, the more detail will be in your mesh. So we need to have enough points on our mesh to be able to have wrinkles, etc. So you can do it this way, or you can add a subdivision surface modifier. It's the same principle. So now we UV map our plane. Now the important thing is you want to have vertices that you have control over. Otherwise this plane would just fall down with gravity. So you want to have some parts which are fixed or will be animated. In this case we will animate them. So select the points that you will use and we will create a new vertex group. Vertex group is just a saved selection of points that you select now and then you assign it, so you can name it. Let's call it fixed points here. Once you're happy with your selection, you click assign button and then these points are saved into that vertex group. Because we will scale the vertices later on towards the middle, it will create nice wrinkles, but first we will scale it a bit in the width outwards and then now we assigned it to the fixed points. Now we'll create a shape key. Shape keys are just other states of your model that you can always go back and forth to. Or you can always put the percentage of a new state of your model. So it's like a kind of morphing. So now the problem is that we cannot create our shape key animation. So we just redo it. First you create one basic and then you add plus again to create the initial key. You put the value in 100% and now we're going to make this shape key how it looks in the final result, and it will be like this. So now the use of this key is that you can always switch back and forwards between what we changed and its original state. So that's very useful. Later on at some point when it will calculate the physics, we will put this to 100%. So now we have to of course create the cloth modifier with the cloth collision settings. I'm not going to explain everything here, you can find it in other tutorials online because it's a bit complicated, but I will show the things which are here important too. So self collision of course, and also pinning. Pinning is, okay, these points, the group that we just created, the vertex group, will be the ones who are fixed. We enable this cache so that it saves our calculations to our hard drive, and let's just press play to see what happens in the simulation. So you see something is changing, but not a lot. So you see the blue line on the bottom, that's where it calculated. Just going to see if we get a wireframe visual. Not really. Sometimes Blender is not so good at displaying wireframes. So I'm going to just free the bake. So what we just bake, remove it, so that we can rebake it when necessary. Let's rebake this, and while we rebake it, put the value on 1 so that the vertices scale, but we still have no wrinkles. You also have different presets in the cloth modifier that we just applied. You have silk, which bends a lot. You have cotton, which wrinkles a bit less. You have rubber. You have all different presets that you can start from. But you will always need to change these values accordingly to your scene and your preference. So let's just change this to cotton. Also free up all bakes so that we can re-record our new settings. So let's see what will happen. Let's put this back to 0. Maybe we need another subdivision modifier to add a little bit more detail. So I think maybe this is better, a bit more, one more subdivision. So let's collapse this, but we cannot because we have some shape keys. So the annoying thing is you need to remove the shape keys, apply now the subdivision surface and redo what you did with the vertices. So now you see in the fixed points selection it was a bit wrong because we added the subdivision. So it also took the surrounding vertices in that group, so we just very fast redo what we did. Assign this inverse and remove these ones so that none of them are in our selection. Okay, so this is now good. Re-add our shape key. Do this very fast. Scale it down what we did. Okay, and now we're back to where we were, but with one subdivision more. Maybe we can create another material and see how it reacts. So let's try to use silk as preset and see what the result is of that. Yeah, like you see, it's way too much. So you have to scale down the width of this plane. And I think also the silk material is way too thin. Scale this a bit down. Also the vertex scaling. First see what this gives us as results. Not very great, too much. The middle it's okay, but the sides are way too much scaling. So let's change this back to cotton, because I think this will be closer to the real material. What we will do now, instead of manually dragging the value up to 1 of the key, we'll just animate it. So we drag on 0 and press insert key on the value that we want to animate. And then we drag to the frame, number 50, and we put the value of 1 and insert the key again. And now you will see the value is animated in such a way that we never need to manually do this. Whatever changes you make in the scene, the animation will always start at 0 and end frame 50. Let's see what happens. I think it's still a bit too much folded, so let's just scale everything a bit. That looks already much better. Still we have a flat plane actually. When I look on the top view, it's still flat, so we have to do something about this. So let's just add maybe a force field, a turbulence in our scene. Probably this will create wrinkles. Most of the time you need to always put this pretty high, so let's change this to 25 and see what happens when we simulate. And indeed now you see we have already more what we want. You also saw that the cloth was going through the wooden frame of the bed, so the wooden frame needs to have a collision on top so that they don't intersect with each other. So I just create a collision on the bed and see what the result is now. That's already bad. It doesn't intersect, but it pushes a bit outwards, and that's because there are some settings that need to be changed on the collision. You can just remove for a second the wind, if that influences this behavior, but it seems like it's still working even if you put it to 0. So it's a little bit strange. Let's first put this on smooth. Probably, yeah, we have to change in the collision the distance. So let's lower this distance value and see what happens. It still pushes away a bit from the closet. What is nice though is that you can change values on the fly in Blender, so you can see immediately the result. But even though we put it at the minimum distance, it still pushes outwards. So what will be the problem is the closet collision settings instead of cloth itself. Let's go back to frame 0 and go to the collision setting of the closet and see where we can change there. So here we simulate again, and now see, you see when we reduce the outer value of the soft body, the result is good. So this is what we have for simulation. I think this is pretty good. So let's save our Blender file. Let's add a solidify modifier to give it a little bit of thickness. I think this is fine as a result. So let's continue with the other curtain. This curtain will be much more complex because we will do more difficult animation. It will be a trial and error to have the result that we want. Also the fact that it is actually hanging inside the wooden structure, but the bottom is hanging outwards, so you need to model that somehow so that it's not touching the wooden structure. Because if it does, it will create intersection problems and will not have a good result. So let's just subdivide this a bit more, that we can have some nice wrinkles. So the lower part we have to drag outwards. Let's first maybe create a shape key so that we can put this as a key and that we can always return back to the original state. Maybe scale it a bit up because it's colliding with the ground. And now with the proportional editing tool we can translate it a bit outwards of the wood construction. Like that, but it's not so great. Maybe change the linearity. That is better. Let's maybe just scale this a bit in the width so that it's not intersecting with our closet. And now you see the value 01 is stored inside the keys. Now we create another key for the vertices on top that we will again, like the other cloth, will scale towards one direction so that we have wrinkles. So let's see how we can scale this. Something like that. And we also need to drag it to one corner, like what you do in the real world when you grab a curtain and you open it, you push it with your hand to one side. So let's just create a tube that the curtain will slide along. It's a very simple basic cylinder. Later on we will make the ropes, the small ropes that the cloth is attached to, but for the moment it's not important. Position it correctly. We create again the key and put this to 1 at frame 150 so that it automatically moves when we calculate the simulation of the physics. we enable copy attributes so that we can copy our modifiers of the top clothes to the bottom one. So now you see we have the same modifiers. Otherwise we need to redo everything, but I know it doesn't copy the cloth settings. So you need to redo that, that's a bit annoying. Like you see now, without the pinned vertices, it just falls down because there's nothing fixed. So let's maybe first also copy the collision to this cloth, because all the clothes, they should also not interfere with each other. Also make again the pinning group here. It didn't work. Why? Let's see. We had to assign the vertices to the group, and now let's see. Yeah, okay. So it plays the animation of the vertices that we made, and you see this is already better. What we will do now is we enable the subdivision surface, like you can see on the right of your screen. And of course now it needs more time to calculate, but we have also more high quality wrinkles. If you would want to do this in real time in a game environment, then you need to really optimize your mesh more and use not so many polygons. But in the end we will not use animation but just stills, so this is okay. It's already not too bad, so it's not interfering with the other closets, it's also not interfering with the wooden structure. So this is a pretty good result. Let's maybe fine-tune this a little bit. Scale it a little bit more. And let's see what happens. I'm playing this fast forward because otherwise you need to wait for the calculation every single time. You see that the cloth on the top doesn't have collision, so it still goes through. So I forgot to add the collision on this object. So I also put collision here, and now let's see what will happen. Let's see if the settings of both of the clothes are the same. Because if you copy the modifier, it doesn't copy the value. So for consistency, it should be all the same if it's the same material. So now let's see, now that everything has collision, what is the result of this simulation? That's already not bad. You see it still has a few problems. I think we did it a little bit too much. We squeezed it too much, so let's resimulate. Yeah, that's better. So now that we modeled that, it's not finished yet because like I said before, we want to simulate that the hand put it around something so that it's fixed in an open state. So how do we do that? Let's just make a hook and let's put the curtain around that. We can only do that via simulation. This would be very difficult if you would manually brush this or something like that, or sculpt. So that's why we have to simulate this. So now that the hook is made, I'm making just a simple plane so that when we're pushing the curtain to the left, it will not intersect or get stuck in the corner on the left of the wooden structure. So I'm just helping a bit the physics to slide the curtain outwards of the woods. So now I make a model that will push the curtain away, so that it simulates actually a hand. The opening of the model needs to be big enough so that it's not intersecting with the curtain. Otherwise you will get probably weird results. So let's just animate this at frame 120, it's still, and then at frame 180 it moves to this position towards the hook. And then we rotate it and position it over the hook so that when we then return the object back, the grabbing object, that the curtain will fall automatically over the hook and will stick there. Because that's the purpose of this simulation, that we want to have the curtain in a rest state over the hook. So this is our animation now. Try to avoid to push the curtain through the hook or through the wooden structure, because you will force the mesh to push it into these meshes, and then you will create wrong results. So avoid pushing collision objects through other collision objects. It's still intersecting, so I have to move it faster outwards like that. Just a matter of fine-tuning. Okay, so now let's give everything collision, that it's able to interact with the clothes. So let's simulate this and see what the result is. You see, at some point everything was going well, but now it's intersecting with our grabbing objects, so we have to change some values here. Once it's really pushing, it becomes it's overlapping each other. So let's see how we can fix this. What we can do first is increase the quality steps a bit. That can also help to reduce artifacts, overlapping faces, etc. And maybe let's also change the animation of our grabbing object. We have to make sure we don't push the curtain through the hook. So let's see what the result is. Actually, this the upper curtain was not necessary in the scene, so you can just select it and hide it, so that it doesn't resimulate every single time, because now we're focusing on this curtain. Sometimes you just hope everything goes well. Maybe a pray will also help. For the moment, that's not a bad thing at all. And now I see that there's still a problem occurring. Once it's pulling back, it gets messed up. And it has something to do with the hook. Let's put this hook a bit higher. Of course now it would still overlap. And make it a little bit smaller, the grabbing object. This is all pretty time consuming to find the right setup. Of course, once you have it, you'll be glad with the result. We just have to make sure the curtain cannot get anywhere stuck. The smoother the movement, the better it will be for calculation of the physics. So we should not make too brutal moves. Let's make this hook disappear in the beginning so that it's not interfering with the curtain at frame 220, and then it will appear at 230 when the grabbing object pulls back. And that way we avoid intersection. So let's save this again and run the physics. I think this is already the best simulation that we've done, but what I don't like is the way the left arm of the grabbing object pushes from the beginning inside the curtain. So we'll try to fix that fast. But for the rest, I think it's a good attempt. Apart from that, also the curtain falls back, returns to its initial position, so we should try to block that. So now I changed the animation of the grabbing object a little bit, that it's not hitting immediately the curtain. So now it's going nicely around it. The hook appears, the curtain stays for a long time in a good position, but then it still falls back. Now I've just changed the material settings of the cloth, so a little bit less structural, a bit more moss, and let's see now what this gives us. It should bend a bit more than the previous version, which it does, but you also saw it still returns. Let's still continue changing some cloth collision settings. Quality at 30. Because I would like it to, once it's over the hook, that it folds a bit more. Now the structure I feel is still too strong. What you see on the left of the screen is I made a plane which is animated. It's a plane with a collision. And actually that prevents the curtain from falling back once it's dragged over the hook. So you will see now the animation that the curtain stays in its position, and that's what we wanted. There's still some problems with the cloth that intersects itself. That is not so great. So let's try to fix that. Maybe increase the self-collision distance and rerun the simulation. I think also it can help to increase some polygons on this mesh, because I think the more polygons, the more vertices it has, the more accurate your calculation could be, and maybe it could help preventing some problems. I'm going to pick all the physics and let's see what the result is. Okay. That's already a lot better. There's not so many intersecting faces anymore apart from the bottom left. But I think we are going to continue with the result of this. You can always still fix that later if you want, but for the rest it looks pretty good. Let's save this. What Blender actually does is it creates a folder with the same name of your Blender file, and it places in there all the calculated physics steps. So for example, here you can see blend cache underscore bat08. That's the file we have open now. If you would resave it to another name, your animation steps will be lost, because it only looks at the cache files of the same name as your Blender file. We saved the file, so now let's just reopen what we just saved, the final sim.blend, and what you can see here is the animation is gone. That is because Blender looks at the physics folder the same name as your Blender file, and we don't have one for the final sim, only from the last one, bat08. So let's just duplicate the physics that were correct, were good, calculated, and let's just rename this to our last Blender file. In this folder you will see it has all the physics steps. So now let's just close this and reopen it, and we have our physics back. And now in the timeline you can scroll to find which final mesh state you want to export this, so that you can use it for UVA mapping, etc. So we need to use an add-on for this. It is in animation and it's called animation corrective shape keys. In that way we can easily convert what we have now to an editable mesh again, without having all the shape keys and animations. So on the bottom triangle we have to look for the create duplicate for editing, and once we do that we see it made a duplicate with no shape keys, no animation, just a simple mesh. It doesn't have any orientation or position, so we have to copy that to our mesh. But you also have an add-on for that, copy attributes menu, and then you can just press Ctrl C and select what you want to copy. So the position and the rotation, and voila, now it's correctly positioned also. So now we have both the original mesh with the shape keys and the exported, or better say collapsed mesh without any modifiers. Now we can delete our simulated meshes and keep the collapsed ones in our scene. We do the same with the top cloth, but you see it's too high polygon. So actually what I forgot to say also for the previous one is remove the modifiers that you can later on apply again. Because once you export this with the thickness and subdivision, they are all baked in that new mesh and you cannot remove the modifier, enable, disable it. So it's better to remove all the modifiers that you don't need and then convert it to a mesh. So that we can now again add a thickness and add a subdivision. It's very important to always save your modifiers and try never to collapse them unless you really have to. And then incremental save your Blender file so that you still have the original one. Let's delete the animation keyframes. So just animation and then clear keyframes so that they don't have any animation anymore. Let's just unhide our collision objects, delete them. And now we can add again a subdivision surface modifier to both of the models. Looks pretty fine, apart from a small part which we'll fix later. We can now give them a new material, so select both of them, create a new material, and then make links Ctrl L to the other object also, so that they share the same material. Like I said before, it doesn't matter which color it has, you can always change that in Photoshop, but of course if you find already the right color, that's a step ahead. We'll just mostly focus on the dirt texture, the way the contrast is in the image. So we'll start with an orange, because I like this contrast of the dark and the light. And also use this blue layer and put them on top of each other and look for the right blending mode. Let's change the order. Orange on top. Let's completely remove the color from the top one by creating a clipping mask from our hue saturation layer. So now only the orange one has its color removed. Now let's continue looking for the blending mode. I don't want too much contrast. Maybe continue with this one, but remove some of the contrast like that. Bit of blurriness. I think that's pretty good. Maybe remove the black scratches and spots a bit with a clone stamp tool. It's a bit too much. Let's save this as a JPEG. Maybe we forgot to change to resize the resolution to 1048. That's more than enough. Again, save it as a diffuse texture. Okay, let's reload this in Blender. And this is the result. Of course, now it's still very glossy. So we need a bump map. Just UV map this very fast. Minimize stretching a bit. It's difficult to do anything more with this. Only we can make it a bit more straight, because anyway when you unfold this curtain it's actually just a square or rectangle. Now still of course the glossiness is way too high and way too intense, so let's just change the hardness and the intensity to a much lower value. Okay, let's just make a folder of our diffuse that we just created and duplicate this to create a bump map. It's still too much contrast for a bump map, but let's maybe first add the cloth texture on top of this. So the textile relief. You can always duplicate them next to each other in Photoshop. It doesn't need to be the right size. Okay, let's import this one. So now we have to think this complete sheet or complete texture covers our clothes. So how small does this relief needs to be? Something like that. Okay, I think that's a good size. We can make it a bit smaller even, because you need to think about the units. How big is your texture? On what real world scale will this be used? And because we are probably using something like 2 meters, you need to think, how does the structure look like? How big does it need to be to cover 2 meters? So now we just look at different blending options. Which ones give a good mix between the bumpiness of the cotton and just the kind of grayness globally. So let's see what this gives as a bump map. So this is how it looks in diffuse channel. That looks pretty good in size. So let's enable this in the normals. Of course it's still way too high, but you see already what we want to achieve. So now the bumpiness is a mix of the dirt of the color and the cotton seams. Okay, so now we can create a specularity map. Make this pretty dark because this doesn't reflect a lot. It's not glossy at all. Also, of course, save the Photoshop file so that you always have the original layers. Let's load in the specularity map that we just made. Enable the intensity and color. It always gives a good result in Blender. Voila. Maybe a little bit less. Like that. Okay. Actually, I find the wood of the structure still a bit too clean, so let's look for another dirt map which we can use for on our texture. This is maybe a good one, so let's just import this one on our existing file and choose the blending in Photoshop to multiply, maybe something else. Multiply always looks good. Just change it, the contrast a bit more, so that there's a bit more dirt. Just a matter of trying sometimes things out. Okay, let's see what the result is. That's already much better. It's a bit more dirty. It's not too new. Let's add a light to see everywhere how it looks. It looks pretty good. Okay, let's save this and let's continue with the mattress. Let's subdivide this. I'm going to do it a bit faster now because otherwise it will take too long. This is just basic modeling steps. So add edges where there need to be a sharp mesh. Put them further away for a smoother mesh. Yeah, add some subdivision because we will make some deformations. scale this a bit towards the middle. Have a bit more of a bending effect. Do some displacement, very subtle. Find a good displacement map. You can brush this manually, move manually some vertices up and down, but I always like to use some random noise, because you can always still disable it, so that you still have your original mesh. If you deform it, you maybe have to use shape keys or something like that, so that you still have your original file. Now, let's create a pillow, starting from a box. Pillow is a pretty complex shape actually. I'm going to try to just let physics do its thing and see where we can get. So I already skipped a bit, as you've seen already, the modeling. And I'm going to give the mattress a collision and see what our physics can do with the pillow, if it is made for it or not. So let's increase the collision, make this a thick structure, and see what happens. It wants to contract somehow or implode, so let's try to increase the structure and see if we can make anything with this. Not really. Rubber maybe? No. So it seems like you can only use it for clothes, thin objects, thin sheets, but not thick mass. Maybe the soft body modifier in Blender can do this, but I never tried it. Okay, then we have to manually sculpt this, because the physics cannot do what we want. And this is maybe the best simulation, but it's still not what it should be. So let's just manually then shape this pillow. It's actually a bit more difficult than you would think in the beginning. So here this is not really the sculpting mode of Blender, it's more like just selecting vertices, and via the proportional editing tool place everything accordingly. There should be a bit of deformation like you see here. We have some displacement on our pillow. Just make it a bit in a shape that somebody was laying on there, and not too symmetrical, otherwise the human eye can see that immediately, that it's not realistic. So once we're happy with that model, we can duplicate it to make another pillow which lays on top of that one. Can do some smooth vertices to make it a little bit more even. But you can very fast change this into another pillow thanks to the proportional editing tool. Once you have made one model, it's pretty easy to adjust the other one. Make sure they don't overlap. Okay, still some parts is too sharp also. Maybe let's smooth this vertex a bit like that. Bit of difference on one side. In the middle a bit pushed from laying. Okay, now we're going to add the sheet on top of the bed. It's a bit difficult because it's a tight place. So do my best to make it realistic. Let's extrude the sides of the sheet. It will be a bit of a trial and error to see what results the physics will give us. Let's first subdivide it a bit so it has at least some vertices to deform and create some wrinkles. Give it a cloth modifier. I'm just opening an old scene now to compare my settings so that I can put it here. Again, switching forwards and backwards between the Blender files. Okay, so that's copied. Let's put smooth. I'm also going to model the end part, which will be folded like most sheets on a bed, and then that will fall, or at least you'll try to let it fall nicely. Just have to make sure nothing of this sheet is touching the wooden construction, and this is what the simulation gives us. Of course it's falling down, so I need to give everything collision, also the pillows, and later on we will have to fix some of the vertices of the sheet so that it's not falling down. Also put it a bit lower because now it's falling from very high, which makes it bouncing and fall faster onto the ground. Let's try to have no intersections. That's already a lot better. But still, of course, the sheet will fall because one side is open of the wooden construction. Also, the height of the folding is it's too much. It should fall closer on top of each other. Let's add a subdivision surface and see what the result will be. But the subdivision surface modifier is on top of the cloth, so it only adds some visual shading, visual smoothing, but we don't add any geometry for the physics simulation because it's below the cloth modifier. It actually works the opposite of Photoshop, which starts from the bottom to the top. Here it's from the top to the bottom. Let's see now with some more detail. Okay, still not perfect. What we will do now is we will select some vertices that we will fix so that they will not move. So again, we create a vertex group. I don't need any shape keys, so I'll actually just remove them because we're not going to move them. So assign it to the vertex group, and of course now we have to activate that group that we just made in the pinning section, that these will be fixed so that the sheet will not fall on the ground anymore. On the other side it is a bit noisy, let's say, the physics. It's like something is pushing it off. So I think there's some settings in the self collision that to lower this to 0.5 and look at the differences. Now it's falling. It's actually intersecting already now. So it's a bit too low. 0.6 could be a good value. Indeed, that's better. You still see some problems here and there. So let's add a subdivision surface on top of that, and now it looks already a lot better, way smoother. Maybe I forgot to mention, but first we're creating the high poly version. That's always the way we do it. First the high poly, then the low poly. So we keep all our modifiers without collapsing them. So now we have a subsurface on top, then a cloth modifier, then another subsurface, and then a solidify to give it a thickness. There still is a problem on the side, but we'll fix that later. First we're going to make another mesh that we'll use as collision that the sheet will fall on, and we will deform it a bit such a way that it looks like the sheet is laying on top of a kind of a little bit messed up bed. That there's a little bit of height difference because now it's pretty flat. Just give it some noise, this separate mesh, and put it on top of the mattress, and then the sheet will collide on that and it will give a more of a solid feeling. Just have to do some more manual work on the sides to make that flat. That the transition between the mattress and what is on top laying is smooth for the sheet. So of course you have to give that a collision with the same settings as all the other collision objects, and then see what happens. Well, that already looks more convincing. But now with the shading on, it's too noisy, too bumpy. It's not so realistic. And also here there's a problem. Here you see it's overlapping each other, so that always causes very weird results. So always make sure they're always separate, not touching anything else. Let's save this to another file. Maybe look for a different preset for the sheet. No, that's not good. That's too springy. It does some weird things in these settings. Structure is too thin. Also, this is not so good. It's also intersecting still the mattress. But on the left over there in the corner it's already better. It's not too bad, but let's try with a collision of 1, because it's still colliding through itself, and yeah, this is much better. Just like you see, there's a lot of noise going on under the sheet, the collision. I'll try to fix that also. But okay, let's bake what we have now and see. So the animation itself is not so great, but the still is pretty good. I think it's a nice composition like this. So we'll just going on with this. It's not an animation, it's for a still frame, a still model. So we're going for this. You just rename this in a different Blender file, and also not to forget to save the calculation with the same name. So path 11 was the last one, so we copy this and then rename it to our most recent Blender file, bedsim. Okay, and here it is. Now we can go on for the texturing. So we at least apply the first subdivision surface and the cloth. We just rename it to 12 so that we still have our original simulations in the other files. We can keep the subdivision surface because we are going first for the high poly model. So let's UV unwrap this. I think this is already fine. Minimize stretch. I think that will be it. So now we can link the material of the curtain to the sheet. On the paintings you don't see actually what color the sheet has most of the time, so we're just using the same blue as the curtains. So now let's UV map the pillows by creating a mark seam in the middle. Over there. Okay. And then unwrap this. Make sure nothing is overlapping for the normal mapping. Do the same with the other pillow. Minimize stretch. And then organize them good on their UV layout. Use as much as possible from your UV space. Okay. Okay, so now that that is done, we're going to look for a texture for the pillows. Should be a mix of a bit dark and white, but not too dirty. A white sheet or cloth which has been used as a color we want. It's too gray for now, but we will make it lighter. So we just continue working on the Photoshop file of the sheet that we just made, because the structure is the same. Also the cotton, cotton structure can be reused as it is the same material. So let's see what we can do with the hue saturation, or maybe just create another layer. First to create the stripes. They are green kind of stripes, green yellow stripes in the middle. So let's make these first. So a layer with a solid color, then a mask, and we will brush with white on top of that mask to make it visible. This is just our UV of the pillow so that we know where we need to brush. Look for a small brush which is a bit hard on the edge. With shift selected you can select one point and the other, and then it will just draw a straight line between them. But let's create some helpers so that we see if we're actually brushing completely straight. Like that. Create another one for the bottom line. So one side is a front, one is a back. Just drag this a bit down because the line is not so high. Okay, we hide our UV and save this as our pillow texture. Now this is the result. What you see is also some shadowing, so ignore that. So I just do some manual moving of the vertices in the UV layout, that everything is fitting 360 degrees. It's always a bit difficult to match the front with the back. Okay. And this way you don't see any more edges, just try to make it a bit more straight. Okay, that's fine. Now we can brush the rest of the lines. Just place the helpers where the lines are and do the same what we just did. Okay, I skip forwards a bit so that we don't need to do all of this again. So once the lines are ready, it looks like this. So now let's also save our Photoshop file of the pillow, pillow A, and we will create another one for pillow B. First say the diffuse as a JPEG to load in Blender. This is not the, we have to duplicate the material, duplicate the texture, and then import the new texture for pillow B. Let's just resave this again. So our pillows are done, our sheets, only the mattress still need to be textured and UV mapped. Let's just see if everything is sharing the same material here, yes. That's okay. So our mattress. Let's first create seams for the UV mapping. Don't look at the dark part, that's just shadow. Unwrap this. And then we can give it a texture. So we can also start by an existing texture that we already created from the curtain. Just make the color a bit more brown, gray side. Now it's way too much. So I think we just look for a new texture because there's little to do with all these existing textures, it seems. Maybe we can use one of them for some contrast on a gray sheet. Okay, that's is already looking better. Yeah. So now of course we have to adjust the BAM mapping and the specularity. But it seems to be looking okay, so maybe we don't need to change anything for that mattress. So let's texture that hook, because it's also part of our scene. Okay, now I UV mapped it very fast, looked for a texture, adding some mirror here, or some reflectivity like a metal, and that's it for the hook. Now we just model some nails for the upper curtain. Well, we just actually model one and then we instance duplicate them. Can be very simple because it's a very small object. You almost don't see it, so you don't need to add a lot of energy in this. The upper curtain doesn't have a solidify modifier yet, it seems, so we just added one. Let's place this a bit better individually. I still don't like the gray material, the metal, so I'm going to make it a little bit darker here. It's more kind of black metal than gray. Just replace the texture and refresh. Okay, and that's better. Okay, so now everything is textured. Now what we have to do left is create the ropes to connect the curtain with the horizontal tube. So isolate our selection with / so that we can see easier what we're doing. We start with the curve Bézier. The advantage of a curve is that you can give it any shape and also any type of radius. So you can let a triangle follow it. You can use any other shape to follow this direction of the line. So a curve has points, and below and on top of these points you have two controls to change the rotation of the curvature. So now I selected the point itself in the middle to position it, and then once you want to rotate it, you use the end segment controls. Okay, now actually we have just a line. This is actually nothing. It has no mesh, so if you would render it, you would not see it. So we create another curve, a circle, and we use that to define the shape of that line. So you can give it any mesh you want. That by creating another curve, which will be actually the radius of that line, the shape of the radius. So let's select the line, and then you add in the bevel object section the circle that we just created, and now you see it's linked, it's following the line, and when you scale it you can make it larger and smaller. And of course also this is a kind of line, the circle that we made, so you can give it any shape you want. You can give it corners. Now we will reduce a bit the vertices because it's too high. So instantly you see the line updates. So that is for the shape, and now for the line itself we can also give it a lower resolution, so that when you use some curving it adds fewer geometry than if it would be higher. So now we're going to create some knobs Let's just place it a bit better over the bar. To add a point, so to make your line longer, you just press E to extrude. So you select the last endpoint and then you click E, extrude, and then you can continue working on the next point of the line. Every point has two endpoints, and these endpoints you can control the direction of the rotation, and then the middle point is just the position. Sometimes it's good to look at existing images to understand how exactly this line should be to make a kind of realistic knob. Just of course this is fast forwarded because yeah, once you understand how it works, I don't need to show every minute of it. Okay, let's just give the curtain first a thickness by a solidify modifier and then just continue. As the wooden construction is actually in front of these ropes, you will not see so much from these ropes unless you would be inside the bed. So we should not put too much time into this. Once you made one, you can just select everything and shift duplicate it and then reposition it properly so that you don't need to redo everything again. Voila, so now I'm finished with the ropes. They're pretty low poly, which is fine because anyway you won't see them so good. So let's resave this to another file. Okay, now we can UV map them. So we just first select them in the length, shift click on one of the edges, and then we will use that to split the mesh in the UV map and wrap it to give it a texture. Also the edges, I will mark seam them very fast because you will barely see this. Now that the mark seams are done, we unwrap this and let's see. First we have to scale it to 111, reset the scaling, and now we unwrap it so that the dimensions are correct. So this is it. Maybe we can minimize a bit the stretching. Maybe that will help. Minimize stretch and just help a little bit. And now just reorganize to use the maximum of my UV. Once that is done, we found already some texture on texture.com. Just going to adjust it a bit. See if this has a diffuse. And load this in as a new texture. I made a 2 one-dimension texture, so I have to rescale to fit. I'm going pretty fast over this because it's always the same steps. Now I created already a bump map from the same texture. Load this in Blender, enable normal, and reduce of course the density until it looks a little bit like a rope, something like that. So I think we'll stick with this. Let's just enable textures and voila. I think that's it, everything is textured. So now it's time to clean up a bit the scene, rename everything correctly. Now we're going to work with layers because we will create a low poly version from these clothes. So what I press is M and then I select the second box to move my selection to the second layer. And now below here under the mouse you can click between your different layers that you made. So the only problem now is on second layer it's dark because there's no light on our second layer. So we can press move again and also select multiple ones by shift clicking on them. Then also in the other layers the light will be visible. So in that way you can clean up easily or organize a bit your scene. So now we just duplicate our curtains. We move then to the third layer. On the third layer, this will be our low poly scene. So just going to rename everything to low poly. And then we just do it for all the other objects too. In such a way that actually the wooden construction on the first layer will be the same for the high and the low poly because they're just boxes. So we will not change them for the low resolution. So only the second layer is then the high resolution of this, and then the third layer is the low resolution. So for the low resolution on the third layer, we're going to remove all the modifiers because they create way too much polygons. Also the thickness is actually not necessary. Now we're on the second layer and we can increase even a bit the quality because we're going to bake then these normals on our low resolution version. So we just increase a bit the quality because like I said we will use that as our normal map for our low resolution. So now I switch between the low and the high. I activated both layers so that I can still see the low and the high res on top of each other to see how much I need to smooth my vertices of the low one. The smooth vertex function makes my low res looking a bit more smooth, and that's very useful. Let's just undo and redo it to show you vertex, smooth vertex. So the closer the low resolution looks to the higher, the better. So in this way, some of the points which were sticking out are now more smoothed out. So that is good. We'll do the same with the other objects. Select our low poly. Meanwhile, look at the high resolution to see how much of smoothing we can apply. That's a bit too much because also the more you smooth, the more it shrinks. Just undo it and yeah, a bit like that. Not too much. So that at least the roughness is a little bit out of this low resolution. Let's do the same for the sheet of the bed. Already doesn't look too bad, but it will be a little bit better with the smooth vertex. Yeah, that's very good actually. I think this is finished now. This looks good. So let's just switch between this low version and then the high version, and you see there's not so much difference, which is a good thing. So now let's UV map our upper cloth. Create a new texture, let's say of a size of 2048. We give this texture a name. Then later we will bake the normals onto this texture and then save this as an image. UV layout is not great for the moment because it's not using the whole square, but for this tutorial let's just continue with this. What you have to make sure is that you disable your solidify modifier on the low poly one, because you know if you solidify your object it will duplicate on the other side the same UV maps in such a way that they will share the same normals. And sometimes that's not what you want. So let's select the high poly, shift select the low poly. Very important, disable also the solidify on the high poly model, because otherwise you will create problems. And this one is really important, so remove the solidify on both the high and the low resolution. Now we're going to edit mode. What I'm doing here is probably irrelevant because we have our texture size already. Activate selected to active, very important. Now we bake the normals. What you see is actually the texture and the shadows and everything, so we have to select that we want to bake only our normals. Like that. And go into edit mode again and bake this again. That looks already much better. Like you can see, the shape is in the normals, also the bump map is in there, so that's exactly what we want. So now let's go to the again to the low poly and remove the bump mapping, because now we baked just this new normal map. Let's load in this normal map. First, of course, we have to save this image to the disk that we don't lose it. Because it's rendered in Blender, it's not yet a texture on the hard drive. Let's save this as a JPEG. It's a bit lighter. Okay, and let's load this in to see what the result is on our model. Switches to texture mode. Of course, this is now the diffuse. It should not be in the diffuse slots. First enable an image sampling the normal map, and then enable the normal. And this is the result. Activating, deactivating. So that looks pretty good. Problem now is that all the clothes share the same material, so I have to actually add the plus, which means duplicate the material, so that this whatever I do with this material, the other ones won't change along. So I'll just disable the normal map. So you see the normal map here is also already added from the other material, so we can just duplicate that one and then later on replace it. So actually the important thing is that the high polygon has the bump map applied of the geometry, because once we bake the normals, it will add the geometry and also the bump mapping and apply it to one normal map that can be used for the low poly model. So never forget to leave the bump map on the high poly on. Now we're going to bake the rest of the clothes, but I'm not going to show that anymore because it's just the same working method as the first one. Okay, now we finished the second clove. Everything looks pretty fine, apart from you see some yellow lines. That means that there's some intersection, which is okay. Like in the middle of the cloth, probably there's some intersection. So I don't think you will see it, but we can maybe Photoshop that a little bit. So we save the normal map. Let's load in the normal of our second clove, and just with the clone stamp tool fix this, clean this a little bit up. It's probably not really necessary, but I just prefer to do it. It looks a bit cleaner, and maybe it will avoid somewhere that is visible a problem. So just going to resave that, load that in, and the second one is finished, and this is the difference. I fast forwarded to also finish the third one, and it looks like this on the left. It's a nice clean normal map. So let's just enable that on the low poly version, and this is the final result. What I will do now is do some brushing to move a bit some of the parts of the sheets which are not nicely laying on top of each other, because I'm not going to give the sheet any thickness, because it just increases the amount of polygons by 2, and that is in this case not necessary. So I'm just going to manually close this side of the sheet so that it's nicely connected on the bottom. Also here the upper part is a bit too much smoothed, such a way that it shrank a bit, so just place this back up a bit. Yeah, that looks more like it. So now let's maybe just change the mattress, because that is still pretty clean in terms of mesh. The displacement doesn't do that much, so let's just add another displacement on top of that with a new texture and change the strength to, of course, a much lower value. Let's change the displacement size. If you switch from the modifier tab to the texture tab, you need to make sure that the correct displacement map is active, in this case 0.26, because if you have multiple displacements in your modifier, you have to select manually which one you want to change the size or all the other things. Just a little bit, not too much. Something like that. Okay. So this is the difference. Let's maybe add on top indeed a subdivision modifier before the displacement, so that the displacement map has more detail. So now you see suddenly there's much more information in the shape. Because we're making a high poly version, we don't need to look so much at the amount of polys. Just increase this. Yeah, I think that is already much better. So adding a subdivision modifier makes it a lot smoother. You can see the difference. Nothing goes through the sheet, so that's fine. So let's continue to the pillows. As I'm still not quite happy with the final result, I'm just going to give them some more subdivision and add another displacement for some smaller deformation. Like you see here, it's already looking like a more used pillow. So here you can change the texture you want to change from the displacement, that you're not changing the wrong displacement texture, because we have two on this object also. Probably still some smaller displacement. It's good sometimes to change to solid mode, like here, so that you can really see the shape, the model, and then you can reduce it a bit or increase. Let's also do it for the other pillow. A new displacement, a smaller texture. Maybe they're still both a bit too high. It's really a bit of a trial and error with these displacements. So now that we're happy with it, we just duplicate them again and move them to the low poly layer. If your low poly has enough information, so vertices, then instead of removing the displacement because you remove some detail, actually you can also just merge it, apply it onto the mesh. such a way that your low poly will be closer to your high poly then. Because if you remove it, then you lose some deformation. So, but only if your low poly has enough detail. Otherwise, you can get strange results. If you're not happy with the displacement, like in this case, it's not so great. There's not so much difference. So I think maybe the both the pillows need another subdivision for the low poly. Also, they need a little bit more information, I think. So I'm just going 2 steps back until I see the subdivision surface again, and I will subdivide them one more time for the low poly. This is a little bit too low to have some good looking geometry. So I subdivided it. Now the subdivision surface modifier could be deleted, and the same for this pillow. So subdivide. Once that is okay, we can delete and apply the displacement. And now the mesh will be much closer to the high poly version. Both pillows still had collision modifier on it, so these can be removed. We will not calculate any more physics. And now we can just rename them again accordingly, because we just duplicated them, but we didn't rename them yet. So now we still have the mattress, which is a bit too low poly, so like the pillows we will do the same. We'll subdivide it again and then apply the displacements on that, remove the subdivision surfaces, and also apply this one if we want. Yeah, that's okay. There are some problems with overlapping on the left, but for now we'll just continue, or we can fix that later. Now it's time to bake our normal maps. Create a new texture, underscore normal. Okay, 2048 resolution. Now, like you remember, we have to duplicate all the materials so that we don't change the ones of the high poly model. Also all the other ones, just to be sure, I'll just duplicate them. We do it for all of them. It's just a kind of to be sure that we're not changing any of the other materials. Now we shift select on the high poly layer, select the high poly model, then shift select the low poly model, that they're both selected, and in edit mode here we're going to bake them. Voila, immediately a good result. So that will be our normal map for our low poly mattress. So let's save this to the hard drive. And then we can load this in. See what the result is. Of course, you always have to enable the normal map, enable the geometry, and now let's see what the result is. So let's just go only to the low poly layer and isolate our selection. And now this is the difference with and without the normal map. So you see there's some more geometry visible. So I think that's fine for now. So let's go to the next object. Again, first select our high poly, then shift select our low poly. And now we're going to create a new texture for this UV, bake, and voila. Save. And then load this in on the low poly one. You want it to be a normal map, only geometry. Now let's see the differences. See, it has a bit of detail. This pillow, I'm not happy with the low poly. You see a big difference on the corners with the high poly, so I'm going to redo that. So I'm just going to delete the low poly again and duplicate our original one. Move it to the third layer and rename it as low poly. And then just re-edit this one. So with one subdivision it will be better. I would just apply that subdivision, also both displacements, and that looks much better. No more hard corners. So let's select the high poly. Also first duplicate all our materials again, because remember we just duplicated the original one. And let's bake this out. And voila, that's finished. Load this and see what we got as result. Not that much difference, but okay, on some of the angles you really see a lot of difference. Just see that the mattress normal map is black, so let's just reload it in. Okay, that's fixed. Now the only thing that I need to do is over there I have to translate that a bit downwards so that it's under the sheet. A little bit of manual fixing. This tutorial is really a combination of first you create the base with the physics, and then you optimize and finalize with some manual work. Now that we baked the normals, we can enable the solidify modifier again on the high poly versions. What is left is we have to give them a solidify thickness. You do that by selecting all the ones you want to give a thickness, and last select the one it already has one. Activate copy attributes, Ctrl C, select the modifier you want to copy and press OK. And now they all share the solidify instance of that one cloud. Let's just check on our low poly models if the normal maps are all correctly loaded. Yeah. Okay, that seems fine. Just resave this. And this is finished. Now it's up to you. If you want to use this model for high quality rendering, you select the first and the second layer and you render it or you export it. If you want to use it for real-time purposes like online or Unity, you select the first and the third layer and you export your model. That's it. Thank you for watching and following this tutorial.